Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz again, less than 24 hours after reopening it. This morning, Iran's military reinstated what it calls strict oversight of the waterway, and within hours, Revolutionary Guard gunboats opened fire on a tanker trying to pass through. The British military's Maritime Trade Operations Center in Dubai confirmed the tanker came under fire and that an unknown projectile then struck a container ship, damaging some of its cargo. The tracking firm Tanker Trackers says 2 Indian-flagged vessels were forced to turn around, one of them a supertanker carrying Iraqi oil. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that around 20 commercial ships that had been set to cross the strait today are now turning back toward Oman. This is not a diplomatic gesture. This is a shooting war breaking back out on the single stretch of water where roughly 1/5 of the world's oil moves every day. But here's the thing. The story is not that Iran closed the strait. The story is what happened in the 24 hours before they closed it. Rewind to yesterday, Friday, at roughly 1 o'clock in the afternoon Greenwich Mean Time, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posts on X that the Strait of Hormuz is, quote, completely open for the remaining period of the ceasefire, end quote. Minutes later, the President of the United States responds on Truth Social. Thank you, in all caps, followed by a note that the American naval blockade of Iran's ports will remain in place until, and I quote, our transaction with Iran is 100% complete, end quote. So that is the first move. Iran says open, Trump says thank you, keep the blockade going, fine. Then Trump does an interview on Fox Business, and this is where the story turns. In roughly 1 hour of airtime, he tells the audience that Iran has agreed to hand over its entire stockpile of enriched uranium. That Iran has agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely. That Iran has agreed the Strait of Hormuz will stay open permanently. That Washington and Tehran are now cooperating to clear mines out of the waterway together. 7 distinct claims, depending on how you count them, delivered by the sitting president as settled fact. By Friday night at 10:14 Greenwich Mean Time, Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf posts a reply on X. Ghalibaf, by the way, is the same man who led Iran's delegation at the direct talks with the United States in Islamabad last weekend. He is not a random voice. And here is what he writes. Donald Trump, quote, made 7 claims in 1 hour, all 7 of which were false, end quote. He adds that with the American blockade still in place, the strait will not remain open. That is not a diplomatic hint. That is a countdown. This morning at 8:30 Greenwich Mean Time, Iran's Joint Military Command releases a statement through Iranian state television. Control of the Strait of Hormuz, quote, has returned to its previous state under strict management and control of the armed forces, end quote. State broadcaster IRIB puts out the blunt version of the same message. Passage through the strait now requires Iran's approval, full stop. And within hours, Revolutionary Guard gunboats are firing on ships. So that is the sequence. Iran says open, Trump says thanks. Trump goes on live American television and rattles off 7 things. Iran's own parliament speaker publicly calls all 7 of those things false. And then, by sunrise the next morning, the strait is closed again, the ships are fleeing toward Oman, and a supertanker full of Iraqi oil is turning 180 degrees in the water because the Iranian Navy said so. Here is why that sequence matters. Every step of it happened in public. The foreign minister's post is public. The Truth Social reply is public. The Fox Business interview is public. The parliament speaker's rebuke is public. The military statement is public. There is no secret back channel breaking down behind closed doors here. The break is happening on the record in real time. And the question the world now has to sit with is whether any of the progress Trump described yesterday on Fox Business was ever real, or whether Iran's foreign minister said a narrow thing about a narrow reopening for a narrow window, and the American president translated it into a total surrender on live television because that is the version that sounded better on screen. Iran's parliament speaker thinks it is the second one, and today, Iran's military agrees with him with live ammunition. Now, to understand why this moment matters more than it looks, you need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is. It is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil moves through it on a normal day. That number alone would make it the most important piece of water on the planet. But what most of the coverage this year has missed is that this is not just an oil story. It is also a food story. About 1/3 of all globally traded fertilizer passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That is according to analysis of the shipping lanes that feed global urea and ammonia market. And here is what makes that different from oil. Oil has alternatives. You can pull from strategic reserves, you can bring more production online, you can drive less. Fertilizer has none of that. There are no strategic reserves, no substitutes a farmer can swap in during the middle of a planting season, and no second chance if the delivery is late. About half of global food production depends on synthetic fertilizer. Urea prices have already surged more than 60% since the war began. Global fertilizer prices for the first half of this year are now projected to run 15 to 20% higher than baseline. The United Nations Food Agency's chief economist has put it as plainly as an economist ever puts anything. This logistics bottleneck, he said, has no viable workaround in the short term. What that means, in actual human terms, is that the farmer on the other side of the world, the one trying to plant this spring, is standing in a field with fertilizer that either costs 60% more than she budgeted or isn't there at all. She cannot make up the loss next month. The planting window closes and the yield for that season is simply gone. That is the quiet crisis nobody is putting on a chyron. The oil price moves on every headline. The fertilizer price moves when the harvest fails. You can negotiate your way out of a lot of things. You cannot negotiate your way out of a failed harvest. Okay, keep that in mind because it makes the next part land harder. The United States is running a naval blockade of Iran's ports. Trump imposed it on Monday after the first round of U.S.-Iran peace talks in Islamabad ended without a deal. U.S. Central Command confirmed this week that American forces have now turned back 21 ships trying to reach Iran since the blockade began. The American framing, in Trump's own words when he ordered the blockade, is that you cannot let a country blackmail or extort the world by shutting down a choke point. That is Trump's line. Iran is extorting the world. The blockade is the counterpunch. Except the counterpunch has a problem, and America's closest Gulf ally is the one raising it. Saudi Arabia has spent the last several weeks frantically rerouting its entire oil export operation. Not through Hormuz. Across the desert, Saudi oil is now being pumped west to the Red Sea and out through the Suez Canal to global markets, about 7 million barrels a day, through sheer logistical effort. That is Riyadh's Plan B. And Plan B is working. The problem is that Plan B runs through another choke point, the Bab el-Mandeb, at the bottom of the Red Sea, along a stretch of Yemeni coastline controlled by the Houthis. The Houthis have largely sat this current war out, but everyone who watched the Gaza war remembers that Houthi attacks cut Red Sea shipping traffic roughly in half, and the traffic has never fully come back. If Iran picks up the phone to Sana'a and says go, Saudi Arabia loses its backup route the same week it lost its front route. There is no Plan C. So when Saudi Arabia quietly tells Washington that this blockade is too dangerous, they are not making a geopolitical point. They are describing their own economy's kill switch and asking the United States to please stop flipping toward it. And Iran, for its part, has a tool of its own, a small one. Iran has the Gore-Jask pipeline, which runs from Iran's oil fields to the Gulf of Oman and lets the country sneak some exports around the strait without using it. That pipeline moves about 300,000 barrels a day. Hormuz, on a normal day, moves 20 million. 300,000 against 20 million is a straw replacing a fire hose. That is the actual geography of the leverage. Iran can live without Hormuz for a while, with Chinese buyers willing to wait. The world cannot. So when you ask who has the leverage here, this is how it actually stacks up. The United States has the most powerful navy on the planet and the ability to choke off Iran's ports, which is a real lever, and Iran's economy is cracking underneath it. Iran has the ability to close 20% of global oil and 1/3 of global fertilizer with a single phone call to the Revolutionary Guard, which is the most powerful economic weapon any non-nuclear state has ever held. Those two levers are not symmetrical, and they are not opposite. They are both being pulled at the same time at the same table in Islamabad, with Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar trying to keep both sides from walking out before the current U.S.-Iran ceasefire expires on April 22nd. Pakistan's army chief is in Tehran as we speak. Pakistan's Prime Minister is in Antalya, Turkey, sitting down with Turkey's president and Qatar's emir. The entire neighborhood is running emergency shuttle diplomacy, because if these talks collapse, the shooting does not stay in the street. And the rest of the world is watching, and in some cases, openly laughing. The president of Belarus, Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, who is not exactly a neutral observer, posted a line this week that is going to be quoted for a while. He said, quote, "If the Americans couldn't handle Iran, they should not mess with China. They will never be able to deal with that kind of power," end quote. Take that with whatever salt you like, given the source. But the point he is making, that a superpower is publicly struggling to close a deal with the 9th largest oil producer in the world, that point is being made by a lot of voices that are not named Lukashenko. It is being made by Turkey's foreign minister Hakan Fidan, a NATO foreign minister, who this week said on the record that after Iran, Israel cannot live without an enemy, and that building the next enemy has become a state strategy in Jerusalem. That is a NATO foreign minister describing Israel's foreign policy as a hunt for the next target. That is not a line you hear inside the alliance very often. Now, here is the thing about all of this noise, and I want to be careful with this, because it is the part of the story the cable networks are going to miss. Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, even firing on ships, is not, by itself, an escalation toward total war. It is almost certainly the opposite. It is bargaining. Iran is sitting at a table in Islamabad. Iran wants Trump to lift the blockade. Trump wants Iran to hand over what the BBC reports is around 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, 970 pounds of it, believed to be buried under the wreckage of a facility in Isfahan that American bombs hit last year. Trump has taken to calling it, and I am not making this up, nuclear dust. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai went on state television this week and said, quote, "Iran's enriched uranium is as sacred to us as the soil of Iran and will under no circumstances be transferred anywhere," end quote. Trump has also said American troops will not need to go in to retrieve it, and that the United States and Iran will, quote, "work together to go get it," end quote. Iran's foreign ministry says this was never agreed to. That is where the talks actually are. And when you have asks that enormous on both sides, you do not move the ball by being polite. You move the ball by reminding the other side what happens if you walk away. Iran closed the strait today to remind Trump what a no-deal outcome looks like. Trump's blockade is there to remind Iran the same thing from the other direction. The tanker that took fire this morning is a reminder. The 20 ships turning back toward Oman are a reminder. The oil and fertilizer prices moving on every screen tonight are a reminder. This is negotiation with live ammunition, and everybody at the table knows it. Trump, for his part, flying back to Washington on Air Force One after the ships were struck, told reporters that talks with Iran are still ongoing. His words, and I am quoting him directly, were, "We will be talking about Iran later. We have very good conversations going on. It's working out very well," end quote. He said that 3 hours after his own country's closest ally, the United Kingdom, confirmed that an oil tanker had taken Iranian Revolutionary Guard fire in the exact waterway his administration said was reopened yesterday. It's working out very well. Sure it is. Here's what to watch for in the coming days. Watch the actual ships. Watch the tankers on the tracking sites, because the words coming out of Tehran and Washington are going to contradict each other every 12 hours from now until the ceasefire deadline. The vessels will tell you what is actually true. If the corridors Iran has designated open back up, the strait is effectively open. If they do not, Iran is digging in. Watch the next round of talks in Islamabad, which Pakistan is trying to convene early next week. Watch whether Hezbollah holds the 10-day ceasefire in Lebanon, because the entire diplomatic architecture of this moment rests on that ceasefire. And today, a French soldier was killed and 3 others were wounded in an attack on UN peacekeepers in southern Lebanon. France's president is blaming Hezbollah directly. If the Lebanon ceasefire cracks, the Iran talks crack with it. And then watch the fertilizer, because that is the slow burn under all of this. If the strait stays closed or semi-closed through the end of this month, the farmer who could not afford fertilizer this spring is going to be the person who cannot feed her family next spring. That is the crisis that does not make the Chiron. That is the one that outlasts the war. For now, the sequence of the last 24 hours tells you exactly what game we are actually in. Iran said open, Trump said thank you, Trump went on television and claimed the war was essentially over. Iran's own parliament speaker called every one of those claims a lie. The military reclosed the strait. A tanker took Revolutionary Guard fire. And the president of the United States, in the air over Washington, said the conversations are going very well. Watch the ships. The ships will tell you the truth before anyone at a microphone does.